Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Programming and Access 2013. My name is Steve Bishop, and today we're going to be continuing our series on VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications. Today we're going to start on a two-part series on the really big granddaddy object of them all, and that would be the application object. And application is really kind of the root of just about everything. So far we've looked at things like current DB and current project, etc. Believe it or not, those actually derive from the application object. So we can access those other things by starting with application, and then we can say application.currentDB or application.currentProject. And that's how we can actually access those things, starting with the application object as the first, as basically the root of where we're trying to go. So let's take a look at some different applications of the application object. First, I'm going to talk about references. Now, references is a concept that we haven't really discussed yet, but there are references in your database and in basically any Office application, including Outlook or Excel or OneNote. All of those have references. If you can do VBA code on it, you've got a reference in here, okay? And you'll see Visual Basic for Applications is in fact a reference, and that's because it's actually pointing to a file here. I don't know if you can see this, and I can't really make it big enough, but you can see the location for Visual Basic for Applications is actually in a folder here, and this points to a specific file which holds the library for Visual Basic for Applications. And that means all of these keywords, private, sub, stop, debug.print, things like that actually derive from this Visual Basic for Applications object, which is a reference here in our database. Then we have other things that we're referencing. Obviously, the Microsoft Access object library, okay? OLE automation, the Microsoft Office Access Database engine object library, things like your ACE engine, okay, or Jet engine sometimes, is what it used to be called, Jet engine. Now it's called the ACE engine. We also have the Office 15.0 object library, which are just some general objects that derive from Microsoft Office. We have other things here too, and if you scroll down, you'll see on your own that there are a ton of different things that are available to us, including ADO. We have some development environments here. We can get into InfoPath, for example. We can get into the InfoPath Designer. There's OneNote with an extended library or a type library. And it even goes back to 12.0 for me on this computer. There's Outlook. So with Outlook, for example, I can actually create an email and send it right from here within my Access database. I don't have to open Outlook in order to manage emails, believe it or not. Okay, there's even a Facebook and LinkedIn and SharePoint for Outlook that you can access. Microsoft Scripting Runtime is a very popular one, and we will be going over this in the future, especially because there's a very handy part of Scripting Runtime, which is the file system objects, so that you can deal with files on your computer directly. Text files, you can save files, copy files, etc. And then there's SQL Server stuff that you can add, etc. Yeah, I think you guys get the idea now. There is a ton of stuff here that you can add to your Access database as a reference, and then you can use those objects that are in that library within your code, which is really neat. Okay, so let's talk about how we can actually add one of those references. We can actually do this in Access. We can do this right from our VBA. We can say applications.reference add from file, and then I've got a database here which I can actually add as a reference another database. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. Add from file, current project path database1.accdb, which exists right here. Oops, let me get rid of this laccdb file. Oh, I guess I can't. Must already be open. It's probably locked up. We'll fix that a little bit later. But there's my database1.accdb file. So I will add it from the file. But first what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out to my immediate window this true or false property of the application called broken reference. And that basically will tell me if up here in my references, if I've got a reference here, so like database 1 here is referenced, you'll notice that it is pointing to that file, right? If I change the name of the file, then we're going to have a problem here. But let's go ahead and start off first by, let's click on this and let's go and debug print. You'll see that it is false. I do not have any broken references. Okay? So now let's go ahead and break it. Let's change this to, let me go ahead and exit out of here. And I think that will allow me now to go ahead and delete the laccdb file. Nope, still won't let me. Alright, well, screw him. Whatever. Alright, for some reason my computer's not cooperating. It must be open somewhere else. But I'm going to go ahead and change the database 1 file name to database 2, and that's going to break our reference. Okay? So now when I go ahead and run this, we're going to get an error first that says, my project contains a missing or broken reference to the file database 1, because I named it database 2. Alright, let's take a look here. If I go through and I hit debug print on that broken references property, notice that it now says that it is true. I do in fact have a broken reference. Alright, so of course let me just go in here and change this back to A1. And lo and behold, if I run this again, says that it is false. I'm sorry. Let me backtrack that just so you're not confused. Kind of confused myself there for a second. See, it's false. Okay, so broken references are now false because I fixed that database 1 reference. Okay. All right, so that's pretty much everything you needed to know about references. Now let's talk about close current database. What do you suppose this does? How about if I do application.close current database? We just closed the database. What a shock. Okay, we're still in the access window though. I don't know if you noticed that, but the access application, we are still open. Okay, but what I did do was I closed the database, which was the serviceinc.accdb. So I'm going to go ahead and reopen it back up here, and there we go. I'm back in. Okay, so that can be kind of handy to close the current database. How about open the current database? Well, let's just assume that I tried to do that here with just open current database, and then I just tried to open that database 1.accdb and set it to true. What do you suppose is going to happen? I already have the database open. Well, that's kind of odd. I don't really have the database open. Well, that's because I have a database open that is current. Okay, it's kind of tricky to follow along, but since right now I have the Service Inc. database open and is my current database, it doesn't matter what database I try to open, I'm still going to have a current database already open, and therefore when I try to use the open current database, it's going to give me an error. Basically, the only way you can use the open current database method is if you create a variable that is of an object type called access.application. Okay? Then I can use the open current database of the app object to open up that file. All right? So I'm using the same open current database function, but I have to open up another access application first before I make that my current database. And we'll see down here, if I click on it, I am open. And just so you can see, the reason why that happens is on my form open there, I have a little message box that says I am open when the form loads. Okay? So I'm going to set this to the background here, just minimize that. But for the application, that is still the current database. So when I click to close the current database, now if I go back open over here, you'll see we're back to the access window and that database is closed. Okay? So that's what open current database is and close current database. All right? So let's move on here. Code data. Code data is very, very similar to some of those other objects that we were working with, like current project and current DB. This time we're talking about code data. And code data, if we go through here, I'm going to go ahead and move through. You'll see that it's going to go ahead and show me queries, because if I drill down through the code data, I have this collection called all queries. And then I also have a collection called all tables. But that's pretty much all I've got is queries and tables. All right? And this, I don't know if you can see this, is exactly the same thing as what I plan on doing down here with the current DB. I'm looking at the containers of tables and doing a documents.count -1. And this is kind of the same type of iteration here that I'm doing right here. Okay, and you'll see a lot of this redundancy of within Access, where you can access certain properties or find out certain things in multiple locations. All right, so let's go ahead and continue on here. Oops. Don't want to hit breakpoint. There we go. And you'll see that when I go to the document section, if I just scroll up through here, you'll see I have tables, I have documents with tables, and then I have queries. Okay? So you can access all tables as a collection or all queries as a collection from the code data object under the application object. Okay? Or you can also go to the current DB and look at the containers of either tables or queries or what have you, and you can look in the documents property of that and get and you can iterate through, but you have to use this. You can't do it in the same way that I've done here with a collection like this. You actually have to go through and it's an array versus a collection. All right. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I don't really want to go too much into this because we've got a lot to cover, but just understand that application.codeData gives you access to all the tables, and then code data, if I just type this out and hit dot, you'll see database diagrams, functions, queries, stored procedures, tables, and views. Understand that some of these functions come from other projects, the ADP project, rather than ACCDB project, which is what we're currently running. An ADP project is something that plugs directly into a SQL server and does not use the ACE or Jet engine. It just plugs directly into the SQL server. However, that is going to be deprecated in starting in 2013. I think it's the last time you're going to even see an ADP project. As a matter of fact, I think actually 2013 has stopped using it, but because my application is still built in 2010 or 2007 format, I can still access some of the functionality that was provided from back then. But if I were to create a new database of the 2013 type, that would be deprecated and some of these functions would not exist. There's a lot of artifacts that you'll find here in the code, that things that shouldn't be available that are still available because they were made available in previous versions, but if you try to run them now, they won't work. It's really confusing if you really don't know what you're doing, but you can test it out, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. You know, it's not gonna kill anything. So anyway, all right, we've gone on that topic far too long. So let's move on. Create form and create control and delete control. All right, well, let's take a look at this. First, I'm going to go ahead and dim a form as a form. So I'm dimming this object called form as a form. I'm dimming control as a control. And then I'm setting the form to create form. Well, I thought we were talking about this application object. Well, guess what? You actually have a shortcut when you're dealing with the application. Remember how we were able to do current DB, and that was a perfectly fine, or current project, and that was perfectly fine to reference that as an object by itself? Well, I could also do current data, current DB, okay, or current project, etc. So all of these objects, including this method called create form, derives from the application, but I don't actually even need to use application because it's just inherently understood by Access that it should be starting from the application object to find whatever it is you're looking for. Okay, it's kind of a default to know that whatever you're referencing must be deriving from the application object. So create form is a method that is on application. Yeah, so there it is right there. I can do application create form. It's the same exact thing. Okay. Now I do have parameters that are available to me. Database, I can specify a database, or I can specify a form template. But I'm just going to create a generic form. So I'm going to go ahead and move on down here. Create my form. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, but now you notice I just, to help clarify things, I put application in front of this create control. Okay. And I've specified in my create control function the form name, which is up here. Now I don't have a name on here. I didn't name my form at all. So I'm just going to go ahead and use whatever the name that Access gave it. And I gave it as a ACC checkbox in the detail. And then these are TWIPs, which is basically 1 inch from the top left and 1 inch from the right. Or no, 1 inch from the top, 1 inch from the left. There we go. And now if I look back here, you'll see there's that checkbox control that I just created on form 1, which is the form I created with a control that I created. So you can actually create controls and forms on the fly. Okay? You can create a form and then you can add controls to it in your VB application, in the VBA itself. You don't have to go through the designer in order to create it. Isn't that pretty cool? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that control now. So I'm going to use the delete control of the form name and specifying the control name. And what happens? If I go back here and take a look, my checkbox is gone. Uh-oh. All right. So you can do all sorts of neat, cool things. You can delete controls. You can add controls right on the fly while your application is running in real time. Or what we say during runtime. You can change those things. Pretty cool. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and close my form that I created here. No, I don't want to save it. All right. Echo and screen. Echo and screen. Let's take a look at this. Echo false. Okay, now again, this is the same as if I had gone in and said application.echo. Okay, it's the same thing. So echo false. Let me just go back here to the screen. I want to go ahead and click on something else. Uh-oh, I'm clicking and nothing's happening. That's because that's what echo does. I'm turning off the ability for anything to be captured in Access. You cannot do anything. The application is not able to interact with the user. The next cool thing that I can do with the application, though, is I can set the screen property, the screen object mouse pointer property. I can set it equal to different values. And in this case, I'm going to set it to a value of 11. And you'll see that if I go back in here, notice I get the hourglass. Remember that? Remember when we did the do command .hourglass and that changed it to this? Well, that's essentially the same thing. I can change the application.screen mouse pointer equal to 11, and it has the same exact effect. So now I've essentially got rid of the ability of somebody to be able to click on something, and they get this neat little hourglass that says, hey, I'm thinking. Pretty cool, huh? So now let's go ahead and return our mouse pointer back to 0, which is the default, which gives me the ability to have the arrow, but notice I still can't click on anything. So I got to set the echo back to true, and now I can click on things again. All right, so good deal. Next up, we have export XML and import XML, and these two things go hand in hand. I'm going to go ahead and do an export of XML, which again, we just start with application object, drill down saying export XML. I'm going to export a table, and again, this is a value that this is what we have called an enumerable, and I've put in the enumerable of AC export table. Then I'm specifying a table name to export, and I'm setting a file name that I want to export the table to. And if I do that, okay, now I'm going to go and open up a file I just created so you can see. And was it employees? Table 1 employees. Yep, sure was. Oops, hit the wrong button. As an XML. If I open this up, there we have an XML file of the data that's in the table 1 employees table. Okay? So that's really, really handy. You can just export that information that's in that table to an XML file, and you can save it to like a website. If you have a website that's running on your server, you can just export the XML file and put it up there. Depending upon how your application or your website is set up, you can probably just paste or put this XML file up to a location on the server, and that would make this data available through some sort of API that your website would be hosting. Maybe a little bit more complicated than you're thinking, but this is really cool. I mean, you will find yourself needing to access XML files, and that's exactly what we have here. We have the ability to export it as an XML file right from a table. Okay? Then we have, of course, we want to, if we can export it, we probably want to import it. So let's take that employees XML file and let's run it through the import function. And then I also have this AC structure and data, which means I don't just want the structure of this XML file. Okay, if we look at it, here's the structure: table 1 employees ID. Everything that are in these tags is the structure. Okay, but I'm saying I want the structure and I want the data inside of the XML. And what do we get? Well, let's take a look. If I go into my table 1 employees, if I look at this right now, there are my table 1 employees. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete my table 1 employees. Oh, all right. So my table 1 employees has been deleted. Import it. And now, table 1 employees is right back there. There we go. Now, it doesn't have the relationships that I had on there, and I'm going to have to re-add those. But you can see how this actually does the import and export. So that's another really cool way you can export your data to an XML file and move it over and then import it to another database. Okay? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop there with this video, and we're going to continue on in the next video about all of these other functions you can find in the application object.